I'm going to quickly have a look at why and how we can share our faith online. There's lots of things that I could have said, but for today we're just going to look at 3 reasons for why we should share our faith, because we're told to, because it's good news, and because people need it. We're told the whole way through the Bible to share our faith. I could have picked any number of verses, but I've just got 2. Psalm 96:3, declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples. And if we fast forward to the New Testament, Romans 10:14, how can they believe in him if they've never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? We are encouraged to share our faith, but we shouldn't see this as a duty or a chore. Actually, it should be a real pleasure because it's good news. I'm sure you all know the story of the prodigal son in Luke 15, and in that story, the father says this to the older son: we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. When your life it's been completely changed, when you were lost and you've been found, when you've discovered that there is a deep hope in a world that feels horribly dark, you can't wait to share this good news. I don't know how many of you saw the royal wedding when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle got married, but I loved Bishop Michael Curry, who did the sermon. He says this in his book, Crazy Christians: what the church needs, what this world needs, are Christians who are as crazy as the Lord, crazy enough to dare to change the world from the nightmare that it often is into something closer to the dream that God dreams for it. Guys, we've got the opportunity to turn a nightmare into a dream. This is good news, and people need it. Go online just for a couple of minutes and you'll see that the world is a pretty dark place. People are in pain, they're angry, they've got no hope. I heard some horrifying statistics recently that over the last few years, the number of young people with anorexia has risen by 80%. And just earlier in one of the sessions, I heard a stat that 68% of under 17-year-old girls, that's how much it's risen in self-harm. And I don't know if you saw, the BBC did a survey recently and showed that the loneliest group of people are not the elderly people that you might assume, but actually it's the 16 to 24-year-olds. This is the world that we're living in. It's a really dark place. And I don't know if you saw Charlie Brooker's series, Black Mirror, but Charlie Brooker says this: I hope the stories demonstrate that it's not a technological problem we have, it's a human one. Human frailties are amplified by technology. It's not a it's not a technological problem, it's a human problem. 99% of our young people are apparently online constantly. Again, that's a stat I shamelessly nicked from earlier. If that's where our young people are, then I am terrified about what they're seeing online, that dark behavior that Charlie Brooker talks about. They are constantly being bombarded by broken stories, by hopelessness. Our young people need to know that there is a better story. And actually, I think it's up to us to change the narrative online. As many of you know, the World Wide Web was created by Tim Berners-Lee in 1989 at CERN in Geneva. And in that same city in Geneva stands St. Peter's Cathedral, where the 16th century reformer John Calvin famously preached. And like Tim Berners-Lee, he was standing at the brink of worldwide revolution, because the 16th century, with that came the emergence of the printing press, and that totally revolutionized Europe. They created a platform where ideas could be spread in an unprecedented way. And the book Virtually Human says this: what Calvin did in the 16th century was to rediscover the deep truth of God's story for humanity and to reconnect it to the lives of those in his generation. If we are to connect God's story with the lives of our generation, then we've got to communicate on a platform that our young people reside. Not just our young people, but all of those in our generation. And actually, for a lot of our generation, they are residing on Tim Berners-Lee's World Wide Web. The printing press of the 16th century completely revolutionized the spread of the gospel. And actually, if we learn to use it well, then the digital world can be that amazing platform for us. This, as I'm sure all of you know, is Malala Yousafzai. The digital world completely changed her life, but not just her life, the life of millions of young girls around the world. She grew up in Swat Valley, Pakistan, an area which was largely controlled by the Taliban, where often girls were banned from going to school. And with the encouragement of her brave parents, Malala wrote a blog for the BBC under a pseudonym, and suddenly the whole world could hear her voice. Now, the Taliban attempted to kill her in 2012, and rightly so, not rightly so that she was killed by the Taliban, rightly so her story went viral. And she's the youngest ever winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. In 2013, Time magazine said that they voted her one of the 100 most influential people in the world. The digital world is a platform to transform people's lives, but how should we share our faith online? I think we often overcomplicate evangelism and we put unnecessary pressure on ourselves. But really, evangelism is just about sharing our stories, about encouraging people to look at what God has done in our own lives. And there are some better ways of doing that than others. Obviously, we saw in the clip that's probably not the best way to do it. And there's lots of things I could have said again, but I think we're going to have a look just at these three. Don't be too intense, be real, and have integrity. And it's not an accident that actually a lot of this has already come up, even just in Kevin's talk. So how should we share? Well, I think we will be very quickly unfollowed or unfriended if we constantly post about God. I'm not saying we shouldn't post about God, but actually in our offline worlds, we don't shoehorn God into every conversation. So why do we feel like we need to do that online? We don't want to drown our followers in Bible verses. We want to show them that God is relevant, that he loves them, that he's got a purpose for their lives. People are your friends and your followers on and offline for all sorts of reasons, because you're interesting, because you post helpful articles, because you value them. So post about the music that you listen to, the football team that you follow, the campaigns that you're backing, the inspiring speeches that you've heard, and post stuff that has absolutely no purpose except for to make people laugh. I would lose weight, but I hate losing. People will stop asking you questions if you answer back in interpretive dance. That's just funny, there's no purpose. But actually, when we're posting about the normal things, then when we do begin to post about God, people will listen to us because we've earned their respect. They know that we're treating them as friends that we value, not as targets just to convert. The digital world is maybe not the place where people are going to definitively change their mind or become a Christian overnight, but actually it can often be a really good starting place. And there are loads of opportunities and lots of stories I've heard where people do become Christians. There's a guy called Richard Morgan who was a staunch atheist, and he was an avid visitor of Richard Dawkins' website. Every day he would go on Richard Dawkins' website, and one day he came across an article that had been written by church leader David Robertson. Someone had posted it on the site, and because of where it was, it had lots of really quite angry comments, as you'd expect from atheists. And actually, under some of those comments, David Robertson, the church leader, had responded to some of those angry comments really kindly. And this guy, Richard Morgan, was reading all of the comments and just absolutely disgusted at the vitriol that was on the website and really drawn to how kind David Robertson was. And he found himself no longer going on Richard Dawkins' website, but actually going on David's church website. They ended up striking an online relationship. They still never met. And this guy eventually became a Christian. So don't be too intense, but let's pray for those opportunities and be real. I really should have had a digital device here rather than paper, shouldn't I? Shows how much of the dark age I'm in. Be real. There was a recent study that showed, and this is not surprising, that the more someone uses Facebook, the less satisfied they are with life. Our constant comparison of our own lives with other people's perfectly edited pictures, their over-exaggerated achievements, and their fairy tale relationships can be so, so damaging. We are bombarded constantly by unhelpful, fake ideals of beauty. And actually, as Christians, we have got an amazing opportunity to shine a light on our photoshopped world, to refuse to portray our perfectly painted exterior, and to live our whole lives online. This here is 23-year-old Carly Kushner. She started to chart her progress with an acne treatment on Instagram. It was initially a private page just for her to see how it was going. And she eventually made it public, and she says this: "My account was a rebellion against typical beauty blogger accounts. There was no curation, no filters, angles, and certainly no Photoshop. It was about keeping it real." And I think as Christians, we're not called to be real just in an aesthetic sense, but actually to be real about how difficult life is. Life is messy, as Kevin touched on, and actually our social media profiles should reflect that. Orphan No More is a record company and a creative community set up by a Christian musician called Joshua Luke Smith. And I think their Instagram profile is a great balance of these beautiful arty photos, overtly Christian content like this, and actually real vulnerability. These words say, "Come as you are, not as you should be. Don't cover up those scars. That's your glory. That's your story. That's your beauty." This generation needs to know that there is beauty in their scars, that their brokenness can be restored, that there is healing. But the thing is, vulnerability is really not popular. If we want people leading and inspiring us, we often look for wise, strong, sorted individuals. And if we do see people admitting their struggles from a platform, it's often from a place of having already dealt with those struggles. But actually, for so many of our online community, and particularly for our young people, they are encountering real difficulties now. They don't want to necessarily hear victory stories. They want to know that God is with them in the midst of their struggles. They need to know that it's okay to not be okay. This article was part of our magazine, a little bit of a shameless plug. There are loads of these free, so please come and grab one. Our October issue was specifically aimed at young people struggling with mental health issues. And this article was written by Patrick and Diane Reagan, who've set up an amazing charity called Kintsugi Hope, coming from the Japanese word kintsugi, which means golden joinery. And if I break a pot, I tend to put super glue on it and kind of pretend it was never broken in the first place. Whereas in some parts of Japan, they mix their super glue with gold so that actually what was broken becomes beautiful and the scars become a part of the story. And actually, if we begin to share some of our weaknesses, our rough edges, our brokenness online, we give other people the permission to share their stories. And from that place of mutual weakness, we get to point them to a better story, where one day their brokenness will be fixed, where they get to see that their cracks can become beautiful, and where one day, as Samwise Gandhi says in The Lord of the Rings, where everything sad will become untrue. In a world where our young people, they take dozens and dozens of photos before finally picking one, editing it, adding a filter to it, and then uploading it online, let's buck the trend and be bravely vulnerable. So don't be too intense, be real, and finally have integrity. I want to ask you to do something really weird. Could you please all look at your labels on your clothing? Yeah, I'm aware this is strange. Just have a quick look. Has anyone got a mixed fabric on their clothing? I want to alert you to this Bible passage, Leviticus 19:19, which says, "Do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material." Now, do you think you are disobeying the Bible? I'm going to go with no, because actually I think this verse is about something much deeper. I think it's about living an unmixed, seamless life, a life of integrity, where you are not one person to one group of people and another to another. And actually in John 19, I think this says something about Jesus' integrity. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, with the undergarment remaining. And this garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. Now, again, I think this verse is talking about more than Jesus' underwear. I think it's talking about the fact that Jesus lived a seamless life, full of integrity, where he was so secure in his identity as the Son of God that he was his true self in every single situation. And Jesus' seamless life is worlds away from the avatars and the profiles that our young people often feel forced to create. They're perfectly filtered Instagram posts. Their super fun party as broadcast on Facebook. Their Snapchat photo that is incredibly indecent, that they didn't want to post, but they feel like they had to because they would be ostracized if they didn't. So I want to leave you with this challenge. How can you live a seamless life both on and offline? If you stripped away the filters, what would the true you look like online? And from that place of absolute security in your identity as a child of God, how can you reach those in your online communities? The late Steve Jobs said this to a graduating class: your time is limited. Don't waste it leaving someone else's life. Don't let the noise of others' opinion drown out your inner voice. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. I would change that to follow God's heart and his intuition. Let's ask God for the strength to live differently, to live like Bishop Michael Curry challenged us to be those crazy Christians. Let's buck the trend of our Photoshop world, and let's live a different way. Let's be bravely vulnerable. Let's tell a better story. Let's be the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels who by the grace of God can change the world.